The old library had its own heartbeat. I felt it pulsing in the silence at midnight. The air was heavy with the scent of aged paper and dust, a smell I'd grown to love. I thrived on the solitude, on the order of carefully shelving books, the soft rustling of pages, and the warm glow of my desk lamp. But tonight, something felt different. As I shelved a stack of returned books, something caught my eye. A faint glint hidden behind the others. I pulled it out, a worn, ancient tome with a cracked leather spine. The cover was cold beneath my fingers, its texture rough and weathered. I flipped it open. The pages were filled with handwritten entries, each one meticulously dated and detailing tragedies that had struck the university. A fire in the chemistry lab, a fall from the bell tower, a drowning in the campus lake. Each incident was specific, naming the victims. My stomach churned as I read the final entry. The date stopped me cold. It was for next week. The name chilled me even more. Professor Hargrove, one of the most beloved figures on campus. My heart pounded. Was this some kind of sick joke? I flipped through page after page, each one revealing darker details. But then something else appeared, scribbled in the margins in a frantic, hurried hand. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Professor Hargrove's. What was he doing? Did he know? Panic surged through me as I bolted from the shelves, clutching the book. I found him in his office, hunched over his desk, his pen scratching furiously across the page. When he looked up, his eyes were wild, his expression haunted. "Clara? You found it?" "What is this?" I demanded, holding up the book. "It's a record of the past and the future," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't think it would work, but it does. The book predicts deaths. I've been trying to change fate." His words sent a chill through me. "You're writing new entries?" He nodded, his fingers trembling. "I thought if I documented them, maybe I could stop them. But it's not working. I can't change it." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. The idea that fate was unchangeable clawed at my mind. "Professor, what about next week?" I asked, my voice shaking. "We have to warn him. It's too late," he said, shaking his head. "I've tried to erase it, but it's already inked in. The book. It has a will of its own." Desperation clawed at my chest. "Then we need to do something. Destroy it." He hesitated but finally nodded. Maybe that will work." We ran to the furnace in the library, its heat radiating like a living, pulsing force. I clutched the book, my hands trembling. "On three?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "On three," he agreed, his eyes flickering with fear. "1, 2. As I lifted the book, my eyes caught movement. The ink on the page began to shift, the letters rearranging themselves right before my eyes. They spelled out a single name. "Hargrove." "No," I screamed, clutching the book tighter. Professor Hargrove froze, his face pale as he read the name etched onto the page. "It's already begun," he whispered, his voice trembling. But I wasn't ready to give up. "We can still stop this," I shouted. Without waiting, I thrust the book into the flames. The fire roared to life, consuming the brittle pages. The ink seemed to scream, twisting and churning in the heat as if fighting to escape. Hargrove and I watched in silence, the flames licking higher until the book was nothing but ashes. The silence that followed was oppressive. Hargrove dropped into a chair, his face buried in his hands. "Did we change anything?" he murmured. I didn't have an answer. But as I stared at the glowing embers, a cold realization settled over me. The book might be gone, but its influence wasn't. Fate had a way of weaving its threads, no matter how hard we tried to cut them. The library felt alive again, its heartbeat pounding louder than ever. Only now, I wasn't sure if it was something we'd stopped or something we'd unleashed. The usual hum of suburbia, chirping kids, humming lawnmowers, yapping dogs filled the air. To the onlooker, it was a peaceful, even idyllic scene. But to me, the vibrant life that surrounded me masked a sinister secret. One afternoon, while pruning my garden, I heard a whisper. At first I told myself it was just the wind, but then the trees started speaking. Soft, malicious voices slipped into my thoughts. "Cut deeper," they urged. "Leave nothing behind." I threw the shears down, my heart hammering in my chest, my hand shook. The thoughts seemed to live, to batter and invade. I spun, stumbled backward, and faced those massive older oaks surrounding me, their branches swayed, almost beckoning. "You can't ignore us," they whispered, weaving between my mind like tendrils of smoke. I tried to tell myself it was just stress. Life had been chaotic, work was relentless, and my mother's health was deteriorating. Still, the whispers did not abate. They grew louder with every day that passed. In bed at night, I lay and stared up at the ceiling while listening to a cacophony of voices. It was as if the plants in my backyard seemed to plot against me and the rabbits in the bushes felt conspiratorial. They wanted me to join them. "Why are you doing this?" I finally screamed into the night, the desperation clawing at my chest. "Because you're one of us," a voice hissed, smooth as silk but cold as ice. "You hear us? You know our desires." The next morning, I dragged myself out, even though the air was thick with a silence that spoke volumes. Walking down the street, the trees whispered secrets to me. The grass beneath my feet murmured in discontent. I couldn't help but wonder if these voices were real, or if I was going insane. I tried to talk to my neighbor, Mrs. Gill, an elderly woman who loved her garden. Maybe she'd understand. But the words felt strange in my mouth, like I was exposing a truth I wasn't ready to share. Was I losing my grip on reality? Were the whispers real, or was I spiraling into madness? Desperate for answers, I sought out Mrs. Gill, my elderly neighbor who loved gardening. She was harmless enough, sweet, with a garden full of vibrant blooms and climbing ivy. If anyone could make sense of this, it would be her. I described the voices, the eerie sensation that everything around me was alive and watching. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of brushing off my fears, she stared at me for a long moment, her gray eyes narrowing. "I've heard them too," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You must be careful. They're old, older than we can comprehend, and they're always hungry." My blood ran cold. "What do they want from me?" I asked, my voice shaking. Mrs. Gill hesitated, glancing toward the towering oak trees that loomed over her backyard. "They want what they always want. To grow, to spread, to consume." Her words followed me back home, the whispers now sharper, more insistent. That night, I couldn't sleep. The voices were no longer just inside my head, but seemed to echo off walls, seeping into every corner of my home. And then, I saw it, the shadow of a branch, not swaying but slithering toward my window. The plants weren't just whispering anymore. They were moving. I realized with a terrifying certainty, they weren't going to stop. They wanted me, and they weren't going to take no for an answer. I couldn't shake off this feeling of no longer being safe in my house. The whispers were incessant, and the shadows of the branches seemed to creep closer every time I glanced out. It wasn't just the plants anymore. It was everything. The living soil beneath one's feet, the humming of air with their intention. The following morning, I found a note pinned to my front door with a thorn. It was written in a jagged, almost illegible scrawl. "You can't run. You belong to us now." My hands shook as I held the note. How could something that wasn't human communicate like this? Panic began welling up inside of me, but I knew I couldn't give in. If I did, they would win. I returned to Mrs. Gill, holding the note like it was a lifeline. She was pale when I showed it to her. "It's worse than I thought," she murmured. "They've chosen you. Chosen me for what?" I asked, my voice quavering. "To be their keeper," she replied in all seriousness. "Their key into the world. They must have an active listener, one whose power they can harness." I couldn't accept this, and I wouldn't. "How do I stop it?" Mrs. Gill was silent for a moment, and then she spoke. "There is only one way. You have to sever the bond before it's too late. Destroy what ties you to them." "But," she trailed off, her eyes shifting away. "But what?" I asked. She let out a deep sigh. "They don't let go easily. They'll fight back. And you might not survive." Her words weighed heavy over me, like an oncoming storm cloud. But I couldn't continue living this way, not knowing whether the whispers would one day consume me. That night, armed with a hatchet and fierce determination, I went to the source, the huge oak in my backyard. I raised the blade, and in a deafening cacophony of anger and fear, the voices shrieked in unison. "Stop!" they screamed. "You'll regret this." But I didn't stop. With every swing, the whispers grew fainter, the air less oppressive. Finally, as the tree toppled to the ground, there was silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. But still standing and breathing hard, I could not shake the feeling that this was not over. The earth beneath me seemed to rumble faintly, a low warning. They weren't through with me yet. The mansion stood before me in the twilight, a crumbling relic of a time forgotten. Thick with mildew, the air was heavy. My steps creaked through the floorboards. I had come to explore, to discover remnants of a life once lived. But the moment I stepped through the threshold, an unsettling chill crawled down my spine. I wandered through the rooms in the fading light, where dust motes swirled. The walls wore the scars of neglect, peeling paint that revealed dark wood beneath. In a corner, half concealed by shadows, I found it. An ornate mirror, its surface tarnished and cracked. It seemed to beckon, whispering secrets long buried. As I approached, I caught a glimpse of my reflection. But something was off. The woman in the glass stared back, a flicker of mischief playing at her lips. I shook my head, brushing off the feeling. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. Days passed. I found myself going back to that mansion every evening, only to be attracted to that mirror. Each time, some strange attachment was growing. The reflection started to change. It would move, yet not precisely like mine. One night, I stood aghast, watching the reflection smile while I froze, with confusion lacing my heart. "Stop it," I whispered, shaking my voice. The reflection held my gaze, a wicked glint in its eyes. I tried to dismiss it. I was tired. Perhaps the isolation was getting to me. But it happened again. The reflection raised a hand, mimicking me, but then, it didn't stop. It started to dance, whirling and pirouetting with an ethereal elegance. While I was frozen, my breathing caught in my throat. The days turned into weeks. I became obsessed, unable to tear myself away. I would watch as the reflection acted out my fears, my insecurities, each movement more exaggerated than the last. I felt my identity slipping, like grains of sand through my fingers. Friends noticed. They called, texted, begged me to come home. But I was lost, trapped in a web woven by my own curiosity. One evening I finally left the mansion, desperate for clarity. I sought help, confiding in a close friend. "I think I'm losing myself," I confessed. "There's this mirror. It's like it wants to take me." She frowned, and concern etched its edges on her face. "Just stop going back. It's just a mirror. You're strong enough. You can break this." I went home that night, a flicker starting in my chest. I would break free. Yet when I finally went to the mirror, a strange body stared back. The reflection in the mirror smirked, some sinewy satisfaction illuminating its eyes. "Who are you?" I muttered, fear clawing at my throat. The reflection leaned closer, its lips curling into a smile that mirrored my own. "I am you," it whispered, "but I am so much more." Panic surged through me. I tried to look away, but I was glued to the spot. The reflection pulled away from the glass, stepping out into my reality. I stumbled back, heart racing. "Stop!" I screamed. But it was too late. The reflection had emerged fully. It stood before me, a perfect replica, yet so eerily different. It reached out, brushing a finger against my cheek. "You've given me life," it said, its voice smooth and cold. "Now, you will fade. I'll take your place." I fought, desperation fueling my resistance. I lunged for the mirror, hoping to shatter it to end this nightmare. But the reflection laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "Do you think you can escape?" It stepped back, watching as I writhed in despair. "You're already gone." Suddenly I felt it, my memories slipping away, each one a fleeting shadow. I screamed, but the sound echoed in the empty halls of the mansion. I was losing myself, my essence draining into the void. The reflection smiled, my own smile, as it took my place. I was trapped, watching from the depths of my mind as it lived my life. No means of escape, no savior. There was only silence, and then nothing.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.